They were still laughing when my father raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting clean through the music like a blade that knew exactly where to land, "this is our family's gift." Every head turned. Every fork paused midair. The chandelier light caught the rim of his glass and made it glow, and for a second, just a second, it looked like something ceremonial, something important. Then he smiled at me. Not warmly, not proudly. The way a man smiles when he's about to tell a story he's told too many times, the kind that always ends the same way. "And this one," he added, tilting his glass toward me, "well, she's still trying to figure life out." The laughter came quick, easy, comfortable. And I felt it land. The ballroom smelled like roses and polished wood, with a faint undercurrent of champagne that had been poured too early and left too long. My brother's wedding had drawn half the county, maybe more. People who had watched us grow up, who had sat in our church pews, who had nodded politely through years of stories they didn't quite question. I stood near the edge of the room, one hand wrapped around the stem of my glass, the other resting loosely at my side. I had chosen a navy dress, simple, clean lines, nothing that asked for attention. I had learned a long time ago not to invite attention in rooms where my father held the microphone. He didn't need one tonight. He never did. "Now, Tyler," he continued, pivoting back toward the groom with a wide, practiced grin. "That boy made me proud from the moment he could throw a football. Discipline, focus, drive everything you want in a son." Applause followed, real this time. My brother laughed, ducking his head slightly, but not enough to hide how much he enjoyed it. He had always worn praise like it belonged to him. "And Karen," my father went on, raising his glass again toward my sister, "smart as they come. Graduated top of her class, married into a good family. What more could a father ask for?" More laughter, more nods, more of that easy agreement that comes from stories told often enough to feel like truth. Then the pause. The shift. I felt it before he even turned. "And Morgan," he said, dragging my name just slightly longer than necessary, like it carried weight he hadn't quite decided how to use. I didn't move, not yet. "She's always been different." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. Our little explorer. No husband, no real plan, always chasing something out there. He waved vaguely as if my life existed somewhere beyond the walls of the room, undefined and faintly amusing. A few people laughed harder this time. Others glanced at me, uncertain. My mother's fingers tightened around her napkin, her knuckles whitening just enough for me to notice. I kept my gaze steady. I had practiced that. Years of it. "Bless her heart," he added, and there it was, the phrase that made everything sound softer than it was. "She means well." That one landed differently, not loud, not sharp, but deep. I let the stem of my glass rest more firmly between my fingers, grounding myself in something physical. The coolness traveled up through my hand into my wrist, steadying the small tremor I refused to show. Not tonight. I wasn't going to bleed for him tonight. I had almost not come. The invitation had arrived in thick cream paper, my sister's handwriting neat and deliberate on the front. No mention of him inside. There never was. Just a simple note. "We hope you can make it." It would mean a lot. I had turned it over in my hands more than once, weighing something that didn't have a name. Obligation, maybe, or curiosity, or that quiet, stubborn part of me that had never quite stopped wanting to walk back into that room and stand there without shrinking. I didn't bring my dress whites. That had been a deliberate choice. No medals, no ribbons, no rank on display. Just the dress, the heels, and the version of me they thought they knew. "Come on, it's just a joke," someone near the front said, half laughing, trying to smooth the edge my father's words had left behind. He nodded, playing along. "Exactly. We tease because we love." The room relaxed. It always did when he said that. It gave people permission to laugh without questioning why. I didn't. Instead, I set my glass down carefully on the table beside me, aligning it with the edge of the linen like I was back on deck where small things mattered, where control was built from details. Across the room near the cake table, a man in dress whites had gone still. I hadn't noticed him before. Not fully. But now I did. His shoulders squared subtly, his posture tightening in a way that wasn't discomfort, it was recognition. His eyes had locked onto me with a precision I knew too well. I held his gaze for half a second longer than necessary. Then I looked away. Timing mattered. It always had. My father kept talking, rolling into another story, this one about a track meet when I was 14, how I had tripped over the first hurdle and finished dead last. He laughed as he told it, the memory polished smooth by repetition. Popped right back up though, he said. You've got to give her that. More laughter. I could see it now the way I hadn't back then, the way people leaned in, not because the story was good, but because he told it like it mattered, like it meant something about who I was. It had once, it didn't anymore. But he didn't know that. He still thought the story belonged to him. The man in white's moved. Just a step, quiet, controlled. But enough. I felt the shift ripple outward from him before anyone else seemed to notice. A subtle tightening of attention, like the air itself had leaned in. My father didn't see it. He was mid-sentence, mid-laugh, still holding the room the way he always had. Then the man cleared his throat. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound carried anyway, low and certain, cutting cleanly through the last of the laughter. Wait, he said. One word. The room tilted. Not all at once. Slowly, like something heavy had shifted beneath the surface and people were just beginning to feel it. My father paused, glass halfway to his lips, a faint crease forming between his brows. Sorry, he asked, still smiling, but less sure of it now. The man stepped forward into the light. Up close I could see the ribbons on his chest, the lines of his uniform sharp enough to hold shape even in motion. His eyes flicked to me again, searching, confirming. Then back to my father. Isn't she? He began and stopped, as if choosing the exact words mattered more than speaking quickly. The room held its breath. I felt mine catch just slightly in my chest, not from fear but from recognition of something inevitable finally arriving. Admiral Morgan? The question didn't rise. It landed. Soft, precise, unavoidable. A fork slipped from someone's hand and struck a plate with a sharp ringing note. The DJ's music faltered, then cut entirely. Conversations collapsed mid-word. My father blinked. Once? Twice. Then he laughed too quickly, too loudly. Admiral, he repeated, shaking his head as if the idea itself was amusing. That's a bit generous, son. Morgan's just... He stopped. Because he was looking at me now. Really looking. And for the first time in his life I saw him hesitate. I lifted my chin just slightly. Not enough to challenge. Just enough to stand where I was. The man in whites didn't take his eyes off me. Neither did the room. And in that quiet, stretching space between question and answer, I realized something with a clarity that felt almost physical. The story he had been telling for years was about to end. The first morning of boot camp didn't begin with light. It began with sound. A whistle that cut through sleep like it had teeth. Metal bunks rattling, boots hitting the floor in uneven rhythm. Someone crying 2 rows down before she even fully woke up. I was already sitting up. Heart steady, breath controlled. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had been preparing for this moment for years, long before I ever put on a uniform. Move, a voice barked sharp enough to make the walls feel closer. You've got 30 seconds to be on your feet and in formation. 30 seconds. Back home, 30 seconds had meant nothing. Here it was everything. I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, pulled my boots on with hands that didn't hesitate, and stepped into line just as the last second burned away. No one asked where you came from. No one cared. That was the first thing I noticed. It didn't matter whose daughter you were, what story had followed you, what label had been placed on your back and repeated until it felt permanent. Here there was only one question. Can you keep up? The days blurred into each other quickly. Push-ups on cold concrete until your arms trembled so hard you couldn't tell if you were still moving. Running until the world narrowed down to breath and impact, breath and impact. Orders shouted, corrected, repeated until they became instinct. There was no room for excuses. No room for the version of yourself you used to be. I watched girls break in ways that didn't make noise. One of them, Emily, had been strong the first week, fast, confident. The kind of person who seemed like she belonged here more than the rest of us. By week 3, she was sitting on her bunk one night staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I can't do this, she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. No one answered. Not because we didn't care, but because we understood something she hadn't yet. This place didn't respond to doubt, only to endurance. I didn't think about my father much. Not at first. There wasn't time. Every ounce of focus went into staying one step ahead of exhaustion, 1 second faster than failure. But sometimes late at night, when the barracks finally went still and the only sound was the slow, uneven breathing of people too tired to dream properly, his voice would find its way back in. "You never finish anything." It came without warning. Soft, familiar. And for a moment, just a moment, I would feel that old instinct rise up, the one that wanted to argue, to defend, to prove something. Then I would roll onto my side, stare at the thin line of moonlight cutting across the floor and let it pass. Because I wasn't here for him. That was the difference. Every step I took, every order I followed, every moment I didn't quit, it wasn't a response to his doubt. It was a commitment to myself. The first time I realized I might actually belong there wasn't during a test. It was during a storm. We were out on the training grounds, rain coming down hard enough to blur the edges of everything, mud pulling at our boots, gear heavier with every step. One of the girls in front of me slipped, went down hard, her pack dragging her sideways. The line kept moving. It always did. I hesitated for half a second. Then I stepped out, grabbed the strap of her pack, and pulled her back up. "Move," I said, my voice low, steady. She nodded, breath hitching, and we fell back into formation together. No one said anything about it. But later that night, one of the instructors stopped beside me. "You didn't break formation," he said. "No, sir." "You helped without slowing down." "Yes, sir." He studied me for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded once and moved on. That was it. No praise, no recognition. But I felt it anyway. A shift. Small, quiet, real. Deployment orders came faster than I expected. The paper felt heavier than it should have in my hands, the ink still sharp, like it hadn't quite settled into permanence yet. Bahrain first. Then the South China Sea. Later, places that didn't need to be named out loud. War doesn't care what your title is. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It just arrives. The first time I saw someone bleed like that, I thought my body would shut down. A Marine barely older than me had gone down, shrapnel tearing through his thigh, the kind of injury that doesn't look real at first. Too fast, too sudden. Training took over before fear could. Pressure. Stay with me, don't look away. My hands didn't shake. Not then. Later, maybe. But not when it mattered. He survived. I wrote his name down that night in a small notebook I kept tucked inside my uniform. I didn't tell anyone about the notebook. Didn't explain why I kept it. But it mattered. Because those names, those moments, they weren't stories. They were proof. Not of who I had been, but of who I had become. Years passed. Not quickly. Not easily. Each promotion came with weight, not celebration. Lieutenant. Lieutenant Commander. Commander. Captain. Every step earned the same way. Quietly. Without announcement. Without anyone back home watching. And somewhere along the way, something inside me settled. The part that had once needed to be seen grew quieter. Not gone. Just different. I still thought about my father sometimes. Wondered if he would understand any of this if he saw it. Then I realized something that changed the question entirely. He didn't have to understand. The letter about my brother's wedding arrived not long after I made Admiral. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The timing felt almost deliberate. Like life had decided to test something I hadn't quite finished. I could have ignored it. Stayed where I was. Let the past remain exactly where it belonged. But there was a part of me, the same part that had run through empty streets at 16, that had stood up after falling, that had walked out of that house without looking back, that knew this wasn't about them. It wasn't even about him. It was about closure. Not the kind you ask for. The kind you take. I didn't bring my uniform. That choice mattered. Because I didn't want to walk into that room and force respect. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. Unannounced. Unprotected. Unavoidable. And now here I was. Back in that ballroom. Standing in the same space where his voice had once defined me. Only this time, it didn't. The man in dress whites hadn't looked away. Neither had I. And as the silence stretched, filling every corner of the room, I felt something settle into place with a certainty that didn't need to be spoken. I had finished something. Not for him. Not for them. For me. The silence didn't fall all at once. It gathered. Like a tide pulling back before it decides what it's going to take with it. My father was still holding his glass halfway to his mouth, the smile on his face stretched thin now, no longer supported by laughter. The room had stopped helping him. That was the first real change. No one rushed in to smooth it over. No one filled the space he left open. He looked at me again. Not the way he used to, quick dismissive, already certain of what he'd see. This time he searched. "You hear that," he said, trying to recover the rhythm he'd always controlled. "Admiral," he gave a short laugh aimed at the man in whites. "Son, I think you've got the wrong person." No one joined him. The man in dress whites didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He stepped closer instead. Up close, the lines of his uniform were sharper, the ribbons more distinct. I recognized the posture before I recognized the face, the quiet precision, the way his presence asked for nothing and commanded everything at the same time. His eyes met mine again, steady, confirming what he already knew. "Ma'am," he said softly, the word landing with weight. "If I'm mistaken, I apologize." He wasn't mistaken. I could feel it in the way the room leaned toward me now. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to shift the balance that had been set long before I walked through those doors. I set my glass down. Carefully. Aligned it with the edge of the table like I had done 1,000 times before in places where control wasn't optional. Then I stood. The chair moved back with a quiet scrape against the floor, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Heads turned, some slowly, some all at once. My sister's bouquet dipped in her hands. My brother's smile disappeared, entirely replaced by something tighter, uncertain. My father didn't move. He watched me like he was waiting for the punchline to reveal itself. I smoothed the front of my dress more out of habit than necessity and lifted my gaze. "Yes," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I am." That was it. No explanation, no elaboration. Just the truth. The reaction didn't come as noise. It came as movement. The man in whites straightened immediately, his posture sharpening in a way that wasn't performative, it was instinct. 2 fingers rose to his brow in a clean, precise motion. "Admiral on deck," he said. And then it happened. Not all at once, not perfectly in sync, but unmistakably. One man stood. Then another. Chairs shifted. Fabric brushed against fabric. Older men first, their movements slower but deliberate, their backs straightening as if muscle memory had been waiting for permission. Younger ones followed, not all in uniform, but standing anyway, something in the moment pulling them upright. A wave. Quiet. Unavoidable. Respect not requested. Earned. I didn't move. I didn't return the salute yet. I let it settle. Let the room understand what it was seeing before I responded to it. Because this wasn't a performance. It was a correction. My father's hand trembled. It was small, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But I was. The glass tipped slightly, and red wine spilled over the rim, splashing across the white linen tablecloth. The stain spread quickly, blooming outward like something alive, something that couldn't be taken back. He didn't notice at first. His eyes were still on me, trying to reconcile something that didn't fit. "Morgan," he said, my name catching in his throat in a way I had never heard before. "What is this?" The question wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusatory. It was lost. Like a man who had just realized the map he'd been using didn't match the terrain anymore. I held his gaze. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to soften it. "This," I said quietly, "is who I am." He blinked again, slower this time. The laughter was gone from his face. So was the certainty. "You should have told us," he said, the words coming out uneven as if he was reaching for something that would make sense of this. All these years. I let the silence sit between us for a moment. Not out of cruelty. Out of accuracy. "I did," I said. His brow furrowed, confusion tightening his features. "When—" The room leaned in again, not with curiosity this time, but with something heavier. Something that understood this wasn't about rank anymore. It was about truth. I took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic. Just enough. In every way you weren't listening for." The words landed softer than his had, but they cut deeper. No one laughed. No one moved to rescue him. Even my brother looked away, his jaw set, his shoulders no longer carrying that easy confidence he had worn all night. My sister's eyes flicked between us, her grip tightening on the flowers she no longer seemed to notice. My mother sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, as if the world had narrowed down to a single point she couldn't afford to lose. The man in whites was still at attention, waiting. I turned slightly toward him and gave a small nod. That was all it took. The salutes sharpened. More precise now, more unified. Not out of obligation. Out of recognition. I returned it. Clean, measured, complete. And in that moment the room understood something my father never had. Respect doesn't come from being the loudest voice. It comes from the weight you carry when you finally speak. The salutes lowered. Hands fell back to sides, but no one sat down right away. The silence remained. Not awkward, not uncertain. Settled. Final. My father looked down, then finally noticing the wine spreading across the tablecloth, the stain darkening as it reached the edge. His grip tightened around the stem of the glass, as if holding onto it might steady something else. "It was just a joke," he said, softer now, almost to himself. "You know how we are, we tease." The words sounded smaller this time. They didn't travel. They didn't land. Because there was nothing left in the room to carry them. I met his eyes one last time. It never was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I turned before he could say anything else. Not out of anger. Not out of avoidance. But because there was nothing left to finish. The story he had been telling for years had ended the moment the room stopped laughing. And this one didn't belong to him. The room didn't recover. Not the way it used to. There was no easy laughter waiting just beneath the surface, no quick pivot back to celebration. The music didn't come back right away, conversations didn't pick up where they had left off. Even the air felt different, heavier, as if something long ignored had finally taken shape and refused to dissolve. I stood there for a moment longer, not because I needed the attention, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Silence, when it's earned, doesn't ask for permission. It holds. My father cleared his throat again, louder this time, as if volume alone might bring the room back under his control. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite form, "that's quite something." No one responded. A few guests shifted in their seats. Others kept their eyes lowered, not out of disrespect, but because they didn't know where to look anymore. The version of the story they had accepted for years no longer matched the woman standing in front of them. My brother stepped forward first. Not toward me. Toward the table. He reached for his glass, lifted it halfway, then set it back down again without drinking. His shoulders tightened, the easy confidence he had carried all night, gone, replaced by something more uncertain. Something quieter. Karen adjusted her grip on the bouquet, the flowers now slightly bent where her fingers had pressed too hard. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. No one knew how to move inside this new version of the room. Except me. I turned to the bride and my brother. She looked at me carefully, as if trying to reconcile the person she had just been introduced to with the one she thought she had been meeting. "Congratulations," I said. My voice was calm, steady, the same tone I had used in rooms far more volatile than this one. She nodded almost reflexively. "Thank you," she replied, her voice softer than before. My brother finally met my eyes. For a moment something flickered there, recognition maybe. Or regret. Or simply the realization that there was a part of my life he had never bothered to understand. You should have said something," he said. Not accusing. Just uncertain. I held his gaze for a second. Then I gave a small shake of my head. It wasn't something I needed to say. He didn't argue. He didn't press. Because somewhere I think he already knew. My mother rose slowly from her chair. She didn't rush, didn't draw attention. She stepped toward me with the same quiet care she had always carried, her hands folding together for a moment before reaching out. "I'm proud of you," she said. It was the first time she had ever said it out loud. Not in passing, not softened by apology. Just clear. I nodded once. "Thank you," I replied. There was more she could have said, More I could have asked. But we both understood something in that moment, that this wasn't the place for it. Not now, not like this. Some things take time. Some things need space. And for once, I was willing to let that be enough. Behind her, my father hadn't moved. He stood where I had left him, one hand still wrapped around the stem of his glass, the other hanging loosely at his side. The stain on the tablecloth had spread further now, reaching the edge, a dark line against the white linen. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in a way that's harder to name. The kind of small that comes when certainty leaves you. When the story you've told for years no longer holds. He met my eyes again, but this time there was no performance in it, no humor, no easy dismissal. Just a question he didn't quite know how to ask. I didn't give him the answer. Not because I couldn't, but because it wasn't mine to give. I picked up my clutch from the table, the simple weight of it grounding me in the present. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me to stay. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I was simply moving forward. The doors to the ballroom opened with a soft push, the warm air of the room giving way to the cool quiet of the night outside. The sound of crickets replaced the low murmur of voices. Gravel shifted under my heels as I stepped out, each movement steady, unhurried. I paused at the top of the steps, not to look back, but to breathe. The night air was different, cleaner, somehow carrying none of the weight that had filled the room behind me. For a moment I stood there listening. Then I heard it. "Admiral." The voice came from the side, low, respectful. I turned slightly. A small group had gathered near the edge of the lot, men and women, some in uniform, others not, but all standing with the same quiet awareness. Faces I recognized, others I didn't. They hadn't come forward inside. They hadn't made a show of it. But they were here, waiting. One of them stepped forward and raised his hand in a salute. Not formal, not rehearsed. Just real. I returned it. Not for the room behind me. Not for what had just happened. But for everything it had taken to get here. As I walked toward my car, the gravel crunching softly beneath my steps, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Not victory. Something quieter. Steadier. Peace. My father had called me a failure. For years that word had followed me, shaped the way others saw me, the way I sometimes saw myself. But tonight it had lost its weight, not because I had proven him wrong, but because I no longer needed him to be right. I reached the car, my hand resting briefly on the door before I looked up at the dark sky above. There are moments in life that don't come with applause. No celebration, no clear ending. Just a shift. A quiet understanding that something has changed and won't change back. This was one of them. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been the one people laughed at, the one they didn't quite see, the one they thought would never get there, I want to know your story. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what kept you going when no one else believed in you. We share stories like this every day, real moments, real journeys, real strength that doesn't always make noise. So if this one meant something to you, stay with us. Subscribe, follow along, and let's keep telling the stories that remind us who we really are. Because sometimes the quietest endings are the ones that change everything.